Yo, what's up, guys? It's your boy Shadow Phoenix here, and today I am going to be discussing the new Art of Fighting game, which will be releasing sometime in the future. We don't know exactly the release date, but I do believe we are going to get uh, a teaser trailer very soon because SNK released, I think it was about 2 to 3 weeks ago, around the time of SWC, I believe, the trailer showcasing, the Tengu mask and Robert flipping the coin. We don't see his face directly, but we do know that it is indeed Robert, because who else flips the coin, right? It's pretty obvious it's Robert. So we don't know definitively if this is going to be for the new Art of Fighting game, because for all we know, this might be DLC for City of the Wolves, or it could be both. It could be, them adding, either Ryo, Robert, or both of them, or into the game, which I think adding both would be a bit too much. I think just having Mr. Karate, 2 would be enough, but I do believe because they showed Robert, and I don't think they could put Robert and Ryo in City of the Wolves. I think this is for the new Art of Fighting game that is to be announced sometime in the near future. Now, the purpose of this video is for me to discuss possibly what this game is going to be like, what this new Art of AOF is going to be like, what's the game going to be like in terms of its gameplay, its visuals, its presentation, what they could possibly do with the characters, and all that sort of stuff. If you guys are interested in this video, please click share, like, and subscribe, and let's get into it. Now, before I get directly into this game, I'm actually going to be talking about the setup for this game, because it seems like SNK is really pushing for this new AOF, not just AOF, but all of its older franchises, which include Fatal Fury. It seems like they're really trying to push these games out there, which I can definitely appreciate, because for the past couple, years, decades, they've been putting a sole emphasis and focus on the King of Fighters, which is my favorite franchise, but people seem to forget that it is a crossover franchise. Initially it was, like, most of the characters in the first game were just crossover characters from other franchises like Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, Psycho Soldier, and Ikari Warriors. The actual original KOF characters were a minority at the time. So people forget, that like a Super Smash Brothers game, this was a crossover, like a Super Smash Brothers or Marvel vs. Capcom, Capcom vs. SNK. This was a crossover franchise initially, which took characters from the other franchises. And so, initially, King of Fighters existed, it coexisted alongside other franchises like Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting and Sam Show, etc. But over time, after the bankruptcy and all the financial troubles that SNK has been dealing with, the only game they could really put a major focus on was the King of Fighters, which was their golden egg. And all the other franchises like Fatal Fury, like Art of Fighting, and even Sam Show, kind of took a back seat in favor of the King of Fighters. So a lot of people forget about that, or they're just completely ignorant about that and don't even know. In the case of me, I used to think Fatal Fury and King of Fighters were like the same thing or whatever. I just I saw Terry and Mai, whatever, and just assumed they were like the same game with different titles or something. I didn't know the difference, right? So a lot of people don't know that. So I think what SNK is doing is they're trying to ease people back into thinking or knowing that the King of Fighters is a crossover franchise, right? It is a crossover franchise. It's not the only franchise where all these characters originate from. It's actually a crossover franchise, and they're trying to ease you in back into that mentality by having Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting come back into the limelight, right? So I think that's what SNK is trying to do, and I really applaud them for that, right? And they're kind of being smart with it as well, because they're like easing one game into the other, and I think that's kind of what they're doing, right? So with Fatal Fury City of the Wolves, they have Mr. Big in the game, right, as the DLC. And even before Mr. Big, actually, let me dial it back before that, you have Marco, right? So although he originated in Garo Marco the Wolves, which is the Fatal Fury game, he's a Kyokugen Ryu fighter, right? So he practices the same martial art as Ryo Sakazaki, right? It's Ryo Sakazaki, Robert Garcia, Yuri Sakazaki, Takuma, etc. He practices that style. He's a practitioner of the style, right? And Ryo is his master, right? He taught him the style. And so he already, by his inclusion in the game, he already blends the Art of Fighting series with the Fatal Fury series, right? He blends them together just by his inclusion and him being a practitioner of Kyokugen Ryu, right? So you already have him in the game, and in his ending, his arcade ending, you see Ryo and Robert in the ending, right? Excuse me, not Robert. Ryo and Yuri. Marco sees, you see Ryo and Yuri in the arcade ending, right? And them talking with one another. So you already have that AOF, presence in Fatal Fury. On top of that, now you have Mr. Big as well as the final DLC character in this Season 1 pass. And not only is he in the DLC pass, but he's also integral to the story of Fatal Fury City of the Wolves, considering that he actually kidnaps Rock's mom and is holding her hostage, So I actually forgot all the story details, but I do know about that at least. And in the Rock ending, you do see you see Jack Turner. So you have a character, Jack Turner, from Art of Fighting in the game and in the ending. And he tries to get back at Mr. Big, for screwing with his gang or whatever. I forgot all the details. It's been a while since I played the arcade ending, so forgive me. I'm more into the gameplay side of things than lore, at least with Fatal Fury. But anyways, continuing onward, you do see that in the game, right? Another thing you see in the game is obviously all the AOF references in Fatal Fury. So in City of the Wolves, when you play on Billy's stage, you see Li Pai Long from Art of Fighting in the background. And when you play on Rock stage, you see, Jack Turner in the background. And in the Terry Bogard stage, with the train, if you peek very carefully, you can see Eiji Kisaragi on one of the trains. So this game's already, setting you up for Art of Fighting, right? They are leaving all these crumbs for you to see, that a new AOF is on the horizon. And so one thing that is pretty clear about this new Art of Fighting game is that it's going to be a continuation. It's not going to be a reboot of the series. It's absolutely not. They're leaving all these breadcrumbs in City of the Wolves. On top of that, Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting have always had a sort of interconnected story, with AOF being a prequel set in the 70s and Fatal Fury initially being set in the 90s, the era that the games were made in. So this new AOF is definitely going to be a continuation of AOF 3 story-wise, lore-wise, etc. And it's also going to be a continuation directly to City of the Wolves. So when it comes to its lore, I have no idea what they're going to do, obviously. I'm not the biggest lore guy, at least with the Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting stuff. I'm more into KOF lore. But, in terms of what they're going to do, obviously I have no idea what they're going to do. This is probably going to be the thing that I have the biggest question mark on, because, we have Mr. Big, in this story, which we don't know all the details about Mr. Big, and we're probably going to find out more once he gets released and we get a story mode in City of the Wolves. But for all we know, Mr. Big might be the bad guy again, the main baddie in Art of Fighting. I don't think he will. I think they might make a new character, a new villain or whatever. I have no idea what the trajectory of this story is even going to be, because I think past Art of Fighting 1 and 2, I think the story kind of takes a downhill turn. Art of Fighting 3, you have this kind of Frankenstein-like figure with Wyler, which, I don't know, he's not the most compelling villain. I don't really care for him or the story of AOF 3. AOF 1 was kind of epic because, Yuri's kidnapped and he has to, Ryo has to fight all these guys, and then he winds up fighting Mr. Karate at the end, and then Mr. Karate turns out to be his father, like some Luke Skywalker type shit. So I think that was pretty cool. And then AOF 2, you see Geese Howard when he was younger, and you fight against him. So I thought AOF 1 and 2 had a pretty solid story, but AOF 3 just kind of took a downhill turn. I don't know what they're going to do with AOF 4, But the thing that actually interests me the most, obviously, because at the end of the day, we play fighting games for the fighting, not for the lore. The lore is just secondary stuff, or even tertiary stuff. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's not the meat and potatoes. The meat and potatoes is the gameplay. This is what everyone's concerned about. And when it comes to its gameplay, for AOF 4, it's kind of up in the air is what they're going to do. This is like the one thing that everyone's been thinking about, when it comes to this new AOF game, because a lot of people just said, AOF, in terms of it being a fighting game, is kind of irrelevant by today's standards, because when AOF initially came out, it was revolutionary. Like, a lot of people who don't know about fighting games, they just assume Capcom invented everything because of the World Warrior. And don't get me wrong, the World Warrior is by far the most influential fighting game, to ever exist. It was very influential, very well done, but they did not invent everything, you know. They just didn't, right? So Art of Fighting introduced a lot of mechanics that would later be used by Capcom and other fighting game companies. So one of the things they added, which was probably the most important thing, was super moves. So, you know, contrary to what people will say, Super Turbo did not invent super moves or whatever. It was actually AOF. AOF invented super moves. And not only that, but original moves, because a lot of the supers in Super Turbo were just enhanced versions of their special moves, like Ryu's Shinku Hadouken, just a bigger Hadouken or whatever. But, you know, the Ryu Rambu from like Ryo and Robert, this is actually like an original move, you know, in their move list, you know, or the Hao Shokoken. So, well, the Hao Shokoken, I guess, is an enhanced version of the Koken, but you get what I'm saying. Like, he's doing a different animation, right, with the Hao Shokoken, rather than just doing the normal animation like Ryu does with the Shinku Hadouken in Super Turbo. They had the taunts. I'm not sure if it was the first game with taunts. I'm pretty sure it is, but not only what did this game have taunts, but the taunts were actually integral to the gameplay system, because in this game, it also, another thing they added, which I think is even more important than the super moves, was meter. So I believe this was the first fighting game with any sort of meter management, which was revolutionary, because now every game, even 3D fighters, have meter. So every game has meter now, and Art of Fighting was the first fighting game, to my knowledge, that has any sort of meter management, and it's tied to your special moves. So when you use your special moves, you deplete your meter. So not only does your special moves get weaker as you keep using it, but eventually you just won't be able to use your special moves at all, and the only way to be able to do it again is to charge up. So this adds another mechanic, is charging your meter, right? So key charge, you know, which you see in like games like Budokai, you know, Dragon Ball Z Budokai, you know, that's all I think about when they charge up. I think about Dragon Ball Z Budokai, you know, as a kid. But yeah, you charge your meter, so meter management, and taunting will deplete your meter. So there's this whole meter management mind game where you're trying to charge, you and your opponent are trying to charge and manage your respective meter, and then you're trying to taunt to get rid of your opponent's meter. So I think this is a very interesting mechanic that I think can still definitely be applied, but it has to be sort of, you know, worked around in this new system, because nowadays a lot of these systems are just taken from other games. So every game now has super moves. Every game has some sort of meter management thing going on. And in the case of Street Fighter 6, now it starts you off with your meter, just like AOF did. So a lot of things that AOF did that were revolutionary are just the standard in modern fighting games. And so if they just come out, which I don't think they're going to do this, you know, you'd be pretty stupid to do this, but I don't think they're just going to come out and have some basic, you know, AOF game with the way that they deal, that they have with the older games, right? Sorry, I'm kind of starting right now, but I don't think they're going to do that. And in terms of AOF 3, which had a very unique system, I think they're going to build upon that, you know, because I think that was definitely the most unique AOF game that they had, because everything else was kind of, you know, obviously it did special things with the meter and things like that initially, but once they introduced that sort of stuff in Fatal Fury and King of Fighters, I just think, you know, the older games just kind of became generic by comparison, right? Just kind of, you know, a slower paced, you know, basic 2D fighter, you know, that has pretty graphics and zoom in effects, but besides that, it doesn't really stand apart compared to later SNK entries. So I think Art of Fighting 3 did something sort of unique and special with the game, making it sort of play more like a ground-based 3D fighter, but with some 2D mechanics. And I think this is where, you know, SNK should build upon. Now, I don't think they should leave it the way AOF 3 is, because I think if they just go full-on 2D, but having the 3D juggle combos and things like that, I think it'll be a detriment to the game, because, you know, why would you play that? Why would you want to play a pseudo 2D 3D game when you could just play a real 3D game? And this made sense back in the day, when before 3D existed, right? Or when they were just you know, making the games on 16-bit, or I would say 32-bit hardware, wherever the bits are, you know, on the Neo Geo, right? That couldn't support 3D. It made sense, you know, when you had like Fatal Fury with the lane system, and then you had KOF with the dodge mechanic and things like that. You know, that made sense back then, but nowadays it doesn't make sense when you have the hardware to make 3D. Why would you purposefully make a 2D game with, you know, and make it play like 3D? I think the smart thing would be to do, in my opinion, is just commit to Art of Fighting being a 3D game and just make it a 3D fighter, right? Have, things like side steps and things like that, like a Tekken Virtua Fighter, especially since the 3D landscape right now is just kind of empty. The only major game right now is Tekken 8, and I guess if you want to consider Virtua Fighter 5 right now, Revo, that game as well, and the new Virtua Fighter 6, which is going to be coming sometime in like 2 to 3 years perhaps. But that's really pretty much it. Soul Calibur's kind of dead. DOA right now is dead. You don't really have any other 3D fighters, but the 2D fighting game sphere on the other end is very saturated. Like, it just seems like there's a new 2D fighter coming out every day, right? Like you got the new Hunter x Hunter game, which isn't the most popular, but you have Hunter x Hunter, you have 2XKO. You also have games that came out already, that are in the sphere, like biggest one being Street Fighter 6. You have Guilty Gear Strive, Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, Dragon Ball Fighters. If you want to get a little bit older, you have Blaze Blue. There's so many 2D fighters on top of, the ones SNK has currently, which are KOF 15, the new City of the Wolves, and even Samsho, even though that game has pitiful online numbers, but there's Samsho. So there's just so many 2D games. So I think if they try to do this pseudo 2D, 3D thing like they did with Art of Fighting 3, I think that would be a detriment to this game. I think this game would probably be dead on arrival if they did that. So I think they should commit to making a 3D fighter, and it's not like they haven't done this already. They kind of did it with KOF Maximum Impact. They've also had 3D fighters like Samsho and the Fatal Fury on PlayStation 1 or whatever, like the Wild Ambition, although that played like a 2D fighter, kind of like a Street Fighter EX, right? So it just plays in a 3D plane, but it plays like a 2D. But I think they really should commit to having this be a 3D game. And the way I would do it, because this game is going to have special moves, right, is rather than, sidestepping with up and down, which I think would interfere with special moves, and you don't want to do that, you have a dedicated, let's say sidestep button, similar to how you have a lane switch button in the Fatal Fury games, the Real Bout games. I think they should have a dedicated button just for switching sides, right? So this doesn't interfere with special move inputs and things like that. So you could switch lanes or whatever, do your side steps with the side switch button, and you have your meter or whatever, and you charge it up, just like you did in older Art of Fighting games. So you have to do your meter management when you use a special move, which is going to be very powerful, because you have the whole meter management thing. So I think this game's predominantly going to be string based, just like Art of Fighting 3. I think that's what they should do. So most of your combos are going to be hand-to-hand combat, right? There's not going to be a lot of jumping in this game. There's going to be some jumping, but not a lot. You're going to do most of your combos grounded, because this is going to be a 3D fighter. And then your special moves are going to do a decent chunk of damage, because you can't use them all the time, right? It's not something you can just throw out willy-nilly every time you use a special move. It uses up your spirit gauge, and it gradually depletes when you use it and gets weaker, and you have to charge it up. And then you have the whole taunt mechanic, which is going to be back, and this will deplete your meter or whatever. And perhaps they could do something else with taunt. Maybe they can have a separate meter, and the taunt can do something to that. But I'm just thinking kind of off the box. I'm not a fighting game developer, but I think this will be a good template. You have a 3D based fighter. You have your link your string based combos. But you'll also have special moves as well, and then you could also add back the desperation move. So when you're very low health, you get access to your desperation move, which does basically like a bunch of damage. And this has always been a thing with SNK games, where you get low health and you get a comeback mechanic. You see this in Samsho, Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting. So I think bringing that back would be good. And it's always been a part of Art of Fighting. It's always been a part of its identity. As long as they, balance it out, and they actually make it an input you have to do, and you can't combo into it, I think it'd be a good balancing mechanism. Because the problem with Rage and Tekken is that it's so easy to do. You just hit a direction, hit 2 buttons. I mean, that's like brain dead. So in Art of Fighting, you always have to do like a special input to get it out, right? So I think they should keep that in the game. Have your special input to get it out, whatever it is. And as long as they don't do the kind of BS thing they did in Art of Fighting 3, where if you hit it under certain conditions, you just win the whole set. I don't think they should bring that back. But bring back desperation moves. and have it be, activated when you're in low health. I think that, that would set it apart from other games where you kind of have access to your really powerful move as long as you have enough meter. Have this be accessed to low health and have it be like a decently hard input, not too hard, but have it be like your standard, super input, whatever it is. Don't have it be brain dead like, Tekken or whatever. Now, the biggest thing that besides the gameplay is probably going to be the biggest thing besides gameplay that is going to be a major deciding factor if people are going to get this game or not is how it's visually going to look, because let's be honest, SNK the past couple years has been kind of struggling with their visuals. They really struggled with KOF 14 in particular. That was not a good looking game, but over time they got a little bit better. SNK Heroines, which a lot of people forget about that game, but that came in between KOF 14 and Samsho. That game still used the same engine as KOF 14, but you could tell they had a little bit more experience with the game, and the models definitely look a lot better than they did in KOF 14. And then with Samsho, they transitioned to Unreal Engine 4, and that was a really good looking game. Not just like on the basis of, oh, it's okay for a modern SNK game. It actually looked really good. This was even before I was into SNK, when I was trying to dabble into fighting games, and I saw how Samsho looked. I unironically thought it just looked like an amazing game. I just loved the art style of the game. Then you got KOF 15, which although it doesn't look quite as good as Samsho, it still looks pretty solid. It is a definite improvement over KOF 14. And then you have Fatal Fury City of the Wolves, which is probably the best looking SNK game to date. But I would say the main issue is they all kind of have an art style that kind of blends into one another. There's some differentiation between them, but they all look like they all be kind of the same, just with a small like touch up or whatever. They all look like they kind of be intermixed or whatever. So for this new Art of Fighting, I really do think it needs a unique identity of its own if they want to push this game to a general audience. And I think when you look at the history of Art of Fighting, it's always been a game that took pride in its graphics. Of all the, let's say main SNK games, this was definitely the most graphically, intense game on the Neo Geo platform when it came to their fighting games. You had these big giant sprites, the zoom in effects, effects on the body, like when they get hit and stuff, you see blood and bruises and things like that. They put a lot of effort into the visuals of this game. So I think it would be a great disservice to this new Art of Fighting game if it just came out and it just looked like another KOF / Fatal Fury, cell shaded graphics. I think if they really want to push this game, they got to really sell on the graphics. I think the graphics of this game have to be a selling point. And they do have the money. They just need the competent developers. I think, if they have the money, which they do, they clearly do have the money. They have enough money to have a 100K tournament for Art of Fighting 3, which is like a super niche fighting game that barely, you see like double-digit numbers on Fightcade maybe sometimes. But just a pretty old game getting 100K, which is more than like 3 major fighting game like prize pools combined at EVO. That's pretty crazy, right? So they definitely have the money. They just need to have the time and developers, right? They need to put some real work. So I think what they should do with this game is have a sort of photorealistic sort of style, like Street Fighter 6. This is going to be maybe a little bit controversial for some people, but I think because Art of Fighting was always that game that was pushing the Neo Geo to its graphical limits in terms of its fighting games, and especially AOF 3, which had the rotoscope graphics and things like that. I just think this game has to be the graphical powerhouse of their major fighting games, right? So I think it should have that Street Fighter 6-esque look where it's like photorealistic. Perhaps you get Shinkiro artwork, which I love Shinkiro artwork, and kind of base the faces of models off of Shinkiro artwork and just go full on in on the graphics, go full on in on all the effects like the bruises and things like that. Have a little bit of blood. Don't go Mortal Kombat, but have some blood in the game, and things like that. Like go full on in on all the physics, right? Not just bruises, but also clothing destruction. I think they should also do this, right? This game has always had clothing destruction, first with the female characters only when you use a special move, right? But then they eventually added this as well for the male characters, I think in AOF 3. Or maybe they also had this since AOF 2. I'm not sure, right? Forgive me, I'm not the biggest AOF expert, guys. But they absolutely should have clothing destruction, but not just with supers, but also in general, like in general combat when they're fighting and stuff, they should also have part clothing instructions. Like your clothes get somewhat ripped a little bit, you get bruises and things like that as you're fighting, and then when you use a super move that finishes off the round, just full on rip off the clothes, right? And things like that. I think they should absolutely hone in on that and make that a whole selling point, is the visceral feel of combat. I think if they did that, this would get people sort of interested, because in terms of its character designs, I think this is probably the weakest aspect, in my opinion, of Art of Fighting. I always felt that of the main SNK fighting games that we think about, like Fatal Fury, King of Fighters, and Samsha, which all have excellent designs, I think the designs in AOF have always been kind of lackluster by comparison. And then, like you have Ryo, which, is basically, Ryu, with an orange gi. And I know the guy who invented Ryo is the same guy who made Ryu, so it's not technically a ripoff, because you would be basically ripping off yourself, and you can't really rip off yourself. But to the general audience, this is just a ripoff of Ryu, just with blonde hair and orange gi. Then you have Robert with this slick back ponytail, and he doesn't look bad. I kind of like Robert. He's got a cool personality, but when I look at Robert, he doesn't necessarily make me want to pick up a fighting game, right? He doesn't have that look to him. Yuri's kind of cute. I like Yuri. I would say the female characters are probably the better designed characters. I would say I really like, like King. I think King has a cool, unique design. I think Yuri's cool. But a lot of the characters are just kind of like forgetful characters. Like Jack Turner is like some fat dude in a biker jacket. Like I don't care for Jack Turner. Then you have character like John Crawley, who is just Guile. I don't think, unless they rework that guy, I don't think he should be put in the new AOF. It's just Guile. It's just Guile. Like why would I want to play rip-off Guile when I can just play real Guile, right? Then you have other characters kind of like, let's see. I would say Li Pailong is pretty cool. I actually like Li Pailong's design. So he's supposed to be like the Vega of the game in terms of its playstyle, but I really like his design. So I think Li is cool. Li should definitely come back. But then you get characters like Mickey. It's like just generic, boxer, just some random generic boxer. So unless they do something really cool with this design, and I think that's kind of what they should do, like, because a lot of these character designs have the same issues that, let's say, Virtua Fighter has, where they just kind of have a generic, look to them. That's not to, like, throw shade at Virtua Fighter. I actually like Virtua Fighter a lot. It's just, character design-wise, it's not, like, my top-tier fighting game choice, right, when it comes to character designs. So I think the same way we're seeing some redesigns for Virtua Fighter 6 to kind of modernize them and make them look cool and get the general audience interested. I think, SNK is going to try and do that as well with, some of their more obscure, kind of milquetoast Art of Fighting characters, right? Some of the ones they have already are already really good, like Kasumi. A lot of people, she's already a fan favorite, so that's why she's the only AOF 3 character to make it into KOF, basically, because everyone else, AOF 3 was just relegated to the background characters or whatever in KOF games. But you actually do see Kasumi as a playable character, so Kasumi's great. She's definitely going to be the new one. She has to be in the new one. Yuri, as much as I like Yuri, and I think this is something that, let's say, AOF 4 should take from Street Fighter 6, is like modernize the look of the characters, because a lot of these characters look very, very 90s, or technically 70s, because they were set in the 70s. In terms of Yuri, she looks like she's from the 80s with those yoga pants. But they should modernize the characters, right? And I know some people are going to hear that and they're going to have certain images in their head, right? But I think they should, because a lot of these characters, they just come out with the new AOF and just have Yuri looking like she did back in 1994. It's not going to sell people on it. It's going to look very dated to like a new audience. Like, I guess the old school SNK fan base would be okay. I mean, I think they'd be disappointed if you just come up with new basic Yuri costume. But you should modernize the characters and make them look like they're set either in present times or in 2000s, because it seems that the City of the Wolves takes place sometime in the 2000s, which is when the original setting was taking place or whatever. So I think at least set in 2000s, make them look somewhat modern. Modernize the look of the characters, give them a fresh new look, because I think that's like the main downside, I would say, of Art of Fighting, is the character designs. It's just, even back then, I think it was kind of meh for a lot of the characters. So I think if they can do what Virtua Fighter is doing now and give them a fresh new look, I think this could breathe new life into the characters and garner interest along with the new graphics. I think this would be what could potentially give Art of Fighting that fighting chance, because, you know, again, Art of Fighting has always been sort of the dark horse of SNK games. You know, like most people, when they talk about SNK games, they mention King of Fighters, they mention Sam Show, and then you have those select people, especially now, mentioning Fatal Fury. You know, especially because back then they had the OVA and things like that. But Art of Fighting has always been the dark horse, which is a shame, because there's so much that Art of Fighting did for the fighting game landscape, that just, not just for SNK, but for all games, they did so much. And it just, you know, it does kind of suck to see it kind of forgotten and not given that love and attention. So I do think if SNK plays their cards right, it's not impossible to bring back AOF, but I think they should, you know, they have to do these sorts of things. You know, maybe, you know, not exactly how I said it, but this is kind of like my wish list, you know, what I think would work. And obviously when it comes to fighting game mechanics, I was kind of like, I didn't go into a lot of it because I'm not a fighting game mechanics expert or whatever. You know, I'm kind of casual. I just like fighting games for the characters and, you know, things like that. I love playing on the arcade stick and whatnot. But I think it's a good general overview. I think having it be a 3D fighter and going that direction, I think would be a good direction for the series. You know, I think the graphics as well, you know, having it have really good graphics. I think that would probably be the main thing to grab in people, because people at the end of the day, I know there's people who don't care about graphics fighting, the hardcore audience. They'll play MVC Infinite, they'll play Power Rangers, they'll play Hunter x Hunter. They don't care about the graphics, they don't care how jank the animations are. They'll play those games. But for general audience, graphics absolutely matter. I think the graphics have always mattered for fighting games. I think they've always been like the main selling point is the graphics for the fighting games. I think fighting games, especially arcade games in general, have always pushed the envelope when it came to visual presentation and graphical ability and things like that. So I think, especially with Art of Fighting, you know, being sort of niche, you know, kind of having all of the odds stacked against them, you know, and with the history of Art of Fighting always being a visually, you know, impressive game series, I think they need to put a lot of attention on the graphics. They cannot have this be another, you know, KOF 15 looking game, right? You know, with all due respect, I love the look of KOF 15. Well, not KOF 15, that one's kind of alright, but I really like the look of City of the Wolves. But you can't have another game with that art style. Like, you can't, right? You need to have games with distinctive art styles, giving people a reason to pick them up. Because if AOF truly comes out just looking like Fatal Fury, City of the Wolves, or kind of like that, and being another 2D fighter, it's going to be eaten alive, not only just by other 2D fighters, but by other SNK titles, right? I really do think they need to do something that sets it apart from other games, right? You know, and this is just my wish list. This is kind of like what I think would make AOF not necessarily a success, but give it a fighting chance. I think really that realistic look, semi-realism look, would get people's eyes on the title and have it be a 3D fighter, you know, a new 3D fighter, but have it be like special moves and things like that. I think this would really get people's eyes and give it that unique look and feel that would give people a reason to pick this up. So if you guys like this video, again, I said this in the intro, please click like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.